My name is Avery Dalton, and the man who once swore he loved me, Logan West, walked into my office at Dalton Holdings and told security to escort me out for Sabrina Cole, my own assistant. I had no idea how long the betrayal had been growing. Watch till the end, and tell me if someone you loved ever lied this completely. 2 guards I knew by first name paused like they were reading the weather, not the woman who signed their paychecks. Logan didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He wore that calm CEO-in-waiting smile, the one I used to trust, and glanced at Sabrina like this was a calendar event, not a coup. Sabrina stood where I stand, hand on my chair, nails painted a Dalton blue I designed for our brand guidelines. She didn't look away. Her lips quivered once, the way a liar's does when the truth is close enough to burn. I thought grief had taught me every angle of pain. I was wrong. This was theft with perfume. "Ms. Dalton," one guard said, voice low, "we've been instructed." I held my badge like a talisman and realized policies I wrote could be used like shackles if the hands were cruel enough. Logan watched me make the choice: fight in public and feed his story, or walk out and keep my spine unbroken. I walked. The elevator doors mirrored me back. A woman in a tailored suit who knew every floor plan of that tower and suddenly none of its exits. Behind me, the glass walls showed Sabrina sliding into my chair. I had hired her, mentored her, corrected her passive verbs, taught her how to steady her breathing before board meetings. I once told her loyalty wasn't a word. It was a calendar of choices. She marked every square in pencil. If you're watching, I'll give you the whole map. How a classmate became a husband. How a husband became a headline. How a headline tried to erase the name on the building my father raised out of debt in winter. You'll hear about the rule he taught me. Never sign what you haven't survived. You'll see how I broke it, and how they used my brokenness as their leverage. And you'll decide if mercy belongs anywhere in this story, because when the doors opened on the ground floor and the city's cold breath met mine, I swore something. Chicago raised me in steel and steam, a city that breathes through vents and speaks in traffic. I learned to read its moods the way some kids read weather. A bright morning that looks honest until the wind turns east. A late-night intersection where the lights seem to blink in code. My father, Michael Dalton, believed cities were machines you could understand if you listened closely enough. Pressure valves, supply lines, the rhythm of people moving to feed the gears. He ran his companies like he respected that rhythm, not as a man who tamed a beast, but as an engineer who didn't want one bolt to shear. I sat through those lessons, drumming my fingers against a leather portfolio, pretending to be bored and catching everything. He let me do that, pretend. He liked the performance of it, the way a teenager SI rolled distracted competitors who assumed I was just a daughter in pressed wool. "Let them underestimate you," he'd murmur while the conference phone glowed. "Then hold them to the numbers." His office looked west across the river, and I swear the glass was always colder than any other window I've ever touched. He worked there like a devoted cartographer mapping a coastline he couldn't afford to misjudge. He was relentless, yes, but he wasn't greedy for applause. He wanted legacy, which is greed's quieter cousin. He wanted permanence in a city that eats permanence and calls it progress. He wanted me safe from anyone who would mistake softness for permission. Safety, to him, was structure. Schedules, binders, process maps that kept human chaos from tipping us into lawsuits or panic. "Emergencies don't exist," he'd say, turning a pen between 2 calloused fingers. "Only events we anticipated or failed to." My mother died when I was 6. I remember the church, the smell of lilies, my father's jaw set like a door that wouldn't open. After that, he built guardrails for us, and the business became more than cash flow. It was scaffolding that held our days in place. I grew up between elevator banks, watching the way adults reset their faces when the doors opened. Elevator faces always told me more than quarterly reports. He was exacting in ways that could feel cruel if you didn't understand he was trying to keep me alive. He corrected my emails for tone and asked me to rewrite them until they felt like a steady hand, not a trembling one. He tested me with ethics hypotheticals no child should know. What if you discover your plant manager hides overtime injuries? What if your largest supplier bribes your logistics director? What if a bid comes back lower than the cost of steel? I'd answer like I was on a quiz show, and he'd nod or frown, then add a layer. What if the manager is your godfather? The supplier funded your favorite charity? The bid comes from a widowed mother who needs the contract? I didn't know it then, but he was soldering my conscience to my spine. We rode site visits together like they were pilgrimages. Southside warehouses where forklifts shrieked, offices in Schaumburg with carpets that swallowed sound, a plant in Gary that blew out warm metallic air. He greeted welders by name and asked accountants about their kids' colleges. He never forgot an anniversary. He kept a wall calendar when everyone else moved to apps because he liked the drag of a pencil line across a square. In red, he wrote production targets. In blue, birthdays. In black, Avery. Learn this. If power is knowing everything, my father's power was knowing enough and admitting the rest. He surrounded himself with people who could say no without flinching. Then he tested whether they still would. There were rules in our house, posted inside a pantry door with magnet clips like they were a recipe. Rule 1. Never sign what you haven't survived. He meant it literally and metaphorically. Read contracts as if you'll be living inside them when the lights flicker and the alarms misfire. Imagine worse days, not just ribbon cuttings. Survive it in your head before you give it your name. Rule 2. Put your shoes by the door facing out so you can run when you must. He'd laugh when he said it, but the laugh had weather in it. Rule 3. If you must choose between being liked and being consistent, choose consistent, then bring cookies to the debrief. He had a way of turning hard edges into something you could pick up without bleeding. I resented him sometimes. Not for the expectations, but for the way he made other dads look like they were playing house. I wanted mess. I wanted to be careless at least once without a post-mortem afterward. I wanted to leave a plate in the sink and not have it turned into a parable about entropy. We fought in clean, quiet skirmishes, the kind where you say normal words and fill them with gunpowder. He'd course-correct gently, and I'd slam a door softer than I wanted because the house was old and the frames were fragile. But when senior year arrived and he sat in the front row of my debate final in a suit too formal for a classroom, I felt the heat of his pride like a lamp I could stand under. He didn't clap until the judge finished speaking. Then his eyes shone in a way that made me forgive him for every laminated procedure he'd ever made me memorize. Chicago was our third parent, stern and generous depending on the month. In summer, I learned to love its lake the way you love a friend who remembers your first bruise. In winter, I learned to walk with my head down, to test black ice with my heel, to recognize the sound of a bus braking on a street salted to the color of bone. On State Street, I learned the cost of beauty when the holiday windows made me want things I couldn't name. On Wacker, I learned to cross with the light, because taxis don't negotiate. In the Loop, at noon, I learned the hum of 1,000 decisions being made above my head by people who didn't know my name and might someday need to. He taught me arithmetic as morality. The margin isn't greed. It's the cushion that keeps your people paid when steel prices jump. The contract clause isn't a trap. It's an umbrella you hope you never open. The budget isn't a punishment. It's a map of promises you intend to keep. If someone brings you a miracle solution, weigh it. If they bring you a problem, pay attention to whether they also bring a plan. And if they bring you flattery, he asked once, corner of his mouth tilting. Check your watch, I said, grinning, because someone is about to ask you to sign something. He tapped the pantry door with Rule 1 and said, Good. I worked summer shifts wherever a pair of hands fit. Reception, procurement, compliance, a week in IT where I reset passwords until my brain turned to oatmeal. It wasn't glamorous, which was the point. I copied until my fingers burned, learned the difference between a vendor who calls only when they need you and one who calls to warn you 3 months early. I learned to spot updates that smelled like excuses and to send meeting agendas the day before with time boxes so nobody could filibuster their way out of accountability. I learned to drink bitter office coffee without flinching, because if you only drink it when it winks good, you'll never drink it during a crisis. When I left for college, he didn't cry. He packed my boxes with military neatness and sharpened my pencils like I would be defending the Constitution every morning at 8 a.m. At the curb, he hugged me with one of those brief, efficient squeezes that speak more love than elaborate speeches. "You'll know what to do when it's time," he said. "And if you don't, call me and lie. Tell me you know. I'll hear the truth and meet you halfway." I laughed because it sounded like him, then cried in the stairwell because it sounded like a prophecy. I promised myself I'd come back with something to show him besides grades. I wanted to bring him a person he could trust, not just someone to join our table, but someone who could shoulder a piece of the scaffolding and let my father put his hands in his pockets for once. Campus smelled like wet leaves and ambition. Lecture halls, dining hall noise, the first taste of unscheduled hours. The freedom was dizzying, and I almost wasted it on nothing. But disciplines harden in you. I color-coded my planner anyway. I worked in the library's acquisitions office and learned which professors returned books late. I ran the student consulting club like a miniature company, and we picked local nonprofits because I wanted a problem set that bled a little. I wore headbands when I needed to look harmless, and dark blazers when I didn't. I laughed easily, because I was happy, because the city I carried inside me hummed, and because the scaffolding held. And then I met a boy who didn't flinch when I said words like depreciation out loud. He sat beside me in a seminar and borrowed a pen with a quick grin, like a dare. He listened when I talked and asked the kind of questions that reveal whether someone likes your mind or just your mouth forming syllables. He walked me to the library without pretending it wasn't a date. He learned my father's rules one by one and teased me for the shoes facing the door. He said, "You plan like a general and laugh like an accomplice." And I felt a lock I didn't know I had click open. In college, I fell for a classmate named Logan West, never imagining he'd become my enemy. Sometimes I resented him. Not for his high expectations, but because he made other dads look like they were just playing house. I wanted mess, to be careless just once without a post-mortem analysis afterward. We fought in these quiet, tense skirmishes, using normal words filled with gunpowder. But when senior year arrived, he sat in the front row of my debate final, his suit a bit too formal for the classroom. He didn't clap until the judge finished speaking, and then his eyes shone with a pride so intense it felt like a warm lamp. In that moment, I forgave him for every laminated procedure he ever made me memorize. When I left for college, he packed my boxes with military precision. He didn't cry, just gave me one of those brief, efficient hugs that say more than any speech. "You'll know what to do," he said. And on campus, amidst the ambition and the wet leaves, I almost wasted my newfound freedom. But his disciplines were ingrained in me. I ran the student consulting club like a miniature company, and then I met him. A boy who didn't flinch when I said words like depreciation. He said, "You plan like a general and laugh like an accomplice," and a lock I didn't know I had clicked open. In college, I fell for a classmate named Logan West, never imagining he'd become my enemy. We had our first fight over a case competition. He wanted to take a calculated risk that doubled exposure if it failed. I preferred a conservative approach that made us look steady. We argued in a conference room with bad air and fluorescent lights, and I caught a glimpse of his steel. He wasn't cruel. He was certain, and certainty can feel like a locked door if it doesn't open to you. We compromised, his bold slide, my contingency plan tucked behind it. We won. He kissed me in a stairwell that smelled like chalk and floor cleaner. The kiss wasn't a celebration. It was an answer key. The relationship developed like a ledger balancing itself. We split bills without drama. We traded study tasks when one of us burned out. He took my night shift at the library during finals so I could finish a paper I started 3 times and hated twice. I showed up to his intramural game and yelled like it mattered. On Sundays, we grocery shopped at the discount mart and tried to build meals that tasted like home without costing the same. He learned my comfort foods. I learned his. He cooked eggs like a scientist, precise heats and patient flips. I made soup that forgave measurement errors. He called me Dalton with a smile, like the name was a cape I could take off when I wanted to be just Avery. When we walked campus, I noticed how people reacted to him. Professors leaning in, classmates relaxing shoulders, administrators asking for his take on student housing policy. He had the gift of making institutions think he could fix them without tearing out walls. I wondered what that gift would look like in a real company, with real stakes. Some nights, I sketched futures with him in which we were co-authors, not substitutes for each other's missing pieces. Winter arrived like a verdict, and we survived it with rituals, shared scarves, shared playlists, a shared promise to pretend snow is romantic until mid-February. We studied in the law library because its silence made us behave. He stole my gloves twice, then bought me better ones. I accused him of laundering heroics. He said heroics bored him. Competence turned him on. The honesty of it thrilled me. He didn't want to be worshipped, just trusted. Trust felt like a warm room where I could set down my Father ES toolbox and still reach for it when needed. When spring finally stretched daylight past dinner, we took those long lake walks again, and he asked bigger questions. What did I want to build that would still be standing when I died? What did I want to protect even if it meant bruises? I said legacy like my father, but with softer corners, scholarships, supplier standards that didn't break people to save cents, a newsroom heat lamp on contracts that hid cruelty. He nodded and told me I think like an operator with a poet's edits. I told him he charmed with compliments engineered to sound accidental. He didn't deny it. The day my consulting club placed a student with a nonprofit that needed grant math repaired, he brought flowers to the office and left them anonymously because he said public congratulations make people look past you to the trophy. I recognized his handwriting anyway. I asked why he didn't sign the card. Because you built the machinery that made the good thing possible, he said. The person who tightens bolts rarely gets a standing ovation. I want you to have one, but I won't force it. I tucked the card into my planner and felt something unclench. We took a day trip to the city so I could show him the version of Chicago that raised me. Greasy spoons and bronze lions, the bridge where I once watched a barge turn with ridiculous grace. He liked the river's muscle and the way people walked like they had jobs to do. He didn't flinch when I pointed up at my father's building. He didn't perform awe. He asked about operations, tenants, maintenance schedules, union relationships. He spoke our language without knowing it had been ours. He made me want to imagine a life where my father's company wasn't a fortress to defend, but a home with extra keys. I knew then that keeping him separate from my family was a pretense that would age badly. He had already met the rules and treated them like shared tools rather than restraints. He didn't need me to shrink to fit his future. He wanted to expand to fit mine. We sat by the lake and watched a plane scrape slow across the sky, and I felt the rare click of alignment. Values, tempo, appetite for work, the way we both counted blessings like auditors and still left room for miracles. I turned to him, heartbeat steady, voice steadier. My dad should meet you, I told him. That dinner changed everything. Michael Dalton believed first meetings were stress tests, not performances. He insisted on dinner at home, not a glossy restaurant where waiters controlled the tempo. I cooked. He plated. Logan brought a pie in a recycled bakery box with the receipt folded under the twine. My father noticed everything. He watched how Logan placed the box on the counter, centered, not careless. How he shook hands, how he waited for permission to remove his jacket. Chicago dusked outside the windows, the river darkening to iron. My father asked for sparkling or still. Logan said, "Tap is perfect," and reached for the nearest glasses, then paused to let me choose. I felt invisible threads tightening between us, a loom beginning to weave. My father liked people who could match tempo without grabbing the baton. Logan did, instinctively. Their first smiles were small, competent, and true. At the table, my father opened with work because that was how he said welcome. He asked Logan what problems he liked solving so much he forgot to check the time. Logan didn't audition. He answered. "I like operational snarls," he said. "Choke points that are invisible to leadership because a dashboard rounds off the pain." He talked about a student-run logistics project, how they cut wait times by mapping who actually touched the boxes rather than who claimed credit on the chart. My father's eyes brightened, that quiet flare I'd watched in boardrooms when someone named a truth without perfume. I breathed easier. They spoke units, throughput, incentives. Then they spoke purpose, the word my father tested like a coin on his teeth. Logan didn't say legacy as a brag. He said legacy like maintenance. Clean filters, paid vendors, scholarships that outlived one man's signature. Dinner was roast chicken, roasted carrots glossed with honey, a salad my father pretended not to prefer. We ate and talked supply risk, not romance, because romance in our house meant competence. Logan asked questions about supplier consolidation and why Dalton Holdings kept a deliberately inefficient redundancy in freight. My father leaned back, pleased. He loved when someone noticed what looked like waste, but was actually insurance. "We pay for empty space," he said, "because someday a bridge will freeze, and what we're really moving is trust." Logan nodded like the sentence matched a sentence inside him. He told a story about his mother, S. Ledger, and how every month she rounded down income and rounded up expenses to survive the surprise. My father laughed. "Conservative accounting," he said, "the difference between sleeping and pacing." Their rhythm met and clicked. After dishes, we moved to the living room, where the city shone like polished nickel. My father pulled a thin binder from the coffee table, the test no suitor ever noticed lurking under the magazines. "Humor me," he said, sliding it across. Inside were 3 case snapshots: a vendor default, a safety incident, a regional manager inflating numbers to qualify for a bonus. Logan didn't reach for a pen. He asked for 5 minutes to think and used 3. He proposed corrective actions with timelines, measured human fallout, and admitted where he'd need counsel. He named the union before my father did. He asked what our insurance carrier would demand and what our conscience would demand if those differed. He even paused to ask what the families of the injured workers would need, not want, need. My father stilled. That stillness is how he smiles when the math adds up to human. Logan asked about my mother without stepping on the bruise. He said he'd heard she loved lilies, then changed the subject before grief turned into performance. My father poured coffee and told a story I'd never heard, how my mother once negotiated with a contractor by cooking him dinner and asking for a clause that preserved a playground. "She believed in parks," my father said, voice thinner. Logan listened, not to collect trivia but to understand the family he was auditioning to join. He said the world keeps what we insist on and loses what we don't mention twice. My father nodded and stared at the steam like it might form words. In that moment, I realized I was watching 2 kinds of men agree about a woman they'd both protect, though only one had met her. It felt like a blessed hand, resting over a fragile machine. When Logan excused himself to wash his hands, my father cleared plates he'd already cleaned and said nothing for a long half-minute. Silence in our house was a diagnostic tool. Finally, he asked, very lightly, what Logan wanted from me that wasn't access. The question didn't offend me, it steadied me. When Logan returned, my father posed it to him directly. Logan looked at me first, then at the man who kept my childhood from unraveling. "Permission to be useful," he said. "Permission to take hits that would otherwise find her." My father's mouth moved as if he'd fight a smile with his last breath. "And if being useful requires you to be quiet?" he asked. "Then I shut up," Logan said, "until it's time to speak, and then I bring data." My father exhaled in a way that sounded like a door unlatching. We ended the evening with pie that turned out to be better than it looked. The crust flaked like good intentions. The filling tasted like October. My father asked Logan about failure. Logan didn't tell a heroic fable. He talked about taking a job the previous summer with a startup that hid labor violations behind shiny pitch decks. How he walked when they refused to remediate. How he ate peanut butter for a month because integrity is cheaper than you think until you were living it. My father admired the details, dates, names, an email trail. "You documented," he said. "Of course," Logan replied. "If you can't prove it later, it didn't happen." The two of them cleaned the kitchen the way men talk when they were not supposed to be talking. I stood at the sink and watched the reflection of their shoulders moving in agreement. Before Logan left, my father walked him to the door and executed his final test, the one that had sent other men jangling down the steps with polite excuses. "Avery loves the company," he said. "She also loves living things that don't have balance sheets. Can you hold both truths when the hours get ugly?" Logan didn't promise the moon. He said he could, and that when he failed, he expected to be told fast. He asked my father what failure looked like to me. He asked me what success looked like to him. The question widened the hallway. My father shook his hand and looked pleased rather than relieved. After Logan was gone, he stood with me by the window, the city humming like a generous machine. "He speaks numbers," my father said, "but he also speaks why." He paused, then said a sentence that altered the floor under my feet. I felt relief pour through me, sharp and clean, the kind that makes you realize you've been holding breath for seasons without knowing you were. After graduation, Dad said, "Start life right. Marry him." We married by Lake Michigan under strings of warm bulbs that trembled in the lake breeze like patient stars waiting their turn to shine. The sky rinsed itself from pink to violet while the skyline stood behind us like a congregation of glass. My dress was simple and architectural, a clean line that made me feel like the woman my father raised, elegant without apology. Logan wore a suit with shoulders that understood responsibility. When we said our vows, the water kept time, small waves ticking against the breakwater as if the city itself approved. I remember my father's face as clearly as the moon. Alert pride, a softness he only let me see, and a calculation that looked like a prayer. He shook Logan's hand longer than custom required, then put our joined hands between his palms like he was pressing a seal into wax. For a second, all the scaffolding of my life felt like a cathedral. Our reception smelled like citrus and varnished wood. We hosted it at a lakeside boathouse where my consulting club once held fundraisers, because we wanted joy with working edges, not a ballroom that pretended struggle didn't exist. Friends danced like Friday had finally forgiven them. My father laughed with old colleagues and told restrained, respectful stories about my mother that turned the room gentler. Sabrina Cole was there as a junior coordinator from our events vendor, brisk and careful, the kind of person who catches dropped details before anyone knows they fell. She pinned my veil, hushed a caterer, adjusted the lighting to flatter older cheeks. "Thank you," I told her, squeezing her forearm, not yet knowing how closely she'd learned my rhythms. Logan and I slipped out to the pier for 10 quiet minutes and watched a tourist ferry carve a bright question mark across the dark water. He kissed my forehead and said, "Let's build our lives like this, visible, sturdy, and kind." When the cake had been cut and the last sparkler hissed in the damp night, my father asked for a private minute. He led us to a bench that looked back at the building with his name on it, its offices lit like a chessboard mid-game. "The first year," he said, "I want you two living with me." He lifted a hand when I inhaled to argue. "Not because I doubt you. Because I want Logan to learn the business from the ground up, without rumor or flattery. Walk the halls before he has a corner. Hear the boilers breathe. See what trust costs." Logan didn't bristle. He took the words like a craftsman takes the weight of a new tool, testing how it sits in the hand. "We'll make it a home, sir," he said quietly. My father corrected him. "Michael, please." It felt like a formal adoption, the kind that includes duty alongside affection. So we moved into the top-floor apartment of my childhood home. Quiet walls, a kitchen that remembered birthdays, an office lined with binders labeled in my father's neat engineer's script. The first morning smelled like toast, printer ink, and lake wind. Logan rose early and shadowed the facilities team, learning the language of vents and valves. I started my own CEO rotation, procurement, safety, compliance, because my father insisted leaders should apprentice to the truth before they try to improve it. At night, we made dinner together and debriefed with the polite intensity of surgeons after a long case. Logan respected the guardrails in our house, shoes facing the door, phones charging outside the bedroom. Disagreements paused at midnight and resumed at 8 with water and a whiteboard. We laughed easily, not because life was soft, but because our habits were strong. Happiness, in those bright years, wasn't cinematic. It was meticulous. Logan kept a running log of factory floor bottlenecks and returned weekly with small repairs that functioned like apologies between systems that hadn't been introduced properly. Label placement that reduced mispicks, a resequenced forklift path that shortened a loop by 40 seconds, a temperature probe replaced before it lied. I learned that love can look like a person standing quietly at the bad corner of a process and refusing to move until the corner behaves. My father watched, unimpressed by theater and deeply moved by repeated competence. On Sundays, he and Logan fixed squeaky hinges and compared vendor terms. I'd bring lemonade and pretend to read while counting the number of silences that were comfortable. It always outnumbered the awkward ones. We built rituals that made the days feel earned. Friday night walks along the river where Logan quizzed me on board committee rhythms. Saturday mornings devoted to errands with a rule. We answered work calls only if someone's safety was at risk. Once a month, we took the maintenance team to lunch at the greasy spoon that knew everyone's order by the second visit. Logan learned people's kids' names. I learned whose mother needed a new roof. We wrote notes after, not to look generous, but to remember where to point help when the weather turned mean. Sabrina joined Dalton Holdings as my executive assistant after a temp contract, recommended by HR because she learned fast and asked the right flavor of questions. She mastered my calendar and anticipated board prep like she'd lived inside my head for a week and taken careful notes before leaving everything tidier. Our marriage deepened in layers that felt aligned with the company's growth. New products tested without showmanship, old contracts renewed because trust kept its phone on. After a year, my father shifted Logan into operations with a formal title, not grand yet, but honest. "Earn breadth before rank," he told him. Logan nodded, eyes bright, a man who liked apprenticeships even when nobody else could see the ladder. At home, he was affectionate without spectacle. He ironed my blouses before tough days and placed a protein bar in my briefcase like insurance. We were not a fireworks couple. We were a porch-light couple. Steady, expected, comforting when darkness made small noises sound like threats. I didn't want children immediately, and Logan didn't pressure. He joked that we were already co-parenting a mid-sized portfolio of stubborn facilities that needed sleep training. We built a savings plan with painfully boring vigor and argued cheerfully about which vacation would give us rest rather than regret. We chose Michigan's quiet dunes over airports. On the beach, he was a lighter version of himself, ridiculous in a sun hat, scribbling ideas for packaging redesigns in the damp margin of the tide like an inventor who trusted the ocean to keep secrets. We returned sunburned and smug, promising to remember that our life wasn't an emergency unless we decided to sprint. Trust thickened. My father handed me tougher meetings. He let me run a vendor summit and watched without interference while I refused a discount that would have stolen wages from a subcontractor's night shift. "Good," he said later, the word shaped like relief. Logan came home that night beaming because a warehouse lead had called him a boss who listens like a cousin. We celebrated with takeout and the show we never admitted loving. Sabrina sent me a clean deck for Monday's update and a text, "You've got this." I wrote back a simple thank you and added a heart, the kind you send to a friend you respect. We hosted small dinners, not the lavish ones that make people perform, Logan could modulate a room without dominating it. I could pull shy guests into the center without making them dizzy. My father sometimes joined with a story that ended in a safety protocol. We teased him and followed the protocol anyway. When our second anniversary arrived, he gifted us a framed copy of Rule 1 in my mother's handwriting, scavenged from an old notebook. Never sign what you haven't survived. I cried because the ink made her present, and because legacy suddenly looked like a hallway with doors we hadn't opened yet. Logan hung it by the pantry with stud finder care, drove the nail straight, and kissed the top of the frame like a benediction. Years turn quietly when the gears are greased. Promotions came without resentment because they rhymed with effort. We took setbacks without melodrama. A storm flooded one of our facilities. Logan slept on a cot on site and sent me photos at sunrise of pallets lifted to dry, faces smiling because the worst had been named and measured. My father's hair silvered. He pretended not to notice. He still beat us both to the office and left after the cleaning crew. On Sundays, he dozed in his chair with the paper draped like a blanket and snored precisely 3 times before waking with a joke. He started calling Logan son occasionally, never theatrically, just as a practical descriptor that filled a sentence better than my daughter's husband. Logan saved those moments like coins, not to spend, just to weigh in his palm. Looking back, I can name the exact texture of the peace we lived inside. Earned, ventilated, prepared for storms without borrowing them. I believed in it the way you believe in a bridge you've crossed 100 times, a confidence made of repetition more than faith. On the night of our 4th anniversary, the 3 of us ate dinner at the small Italian place that knows my father Ann's preference for the table near the kitchen door. He told a story about losing a contract in the 90s and winning a partner instead. Logan added a detail from a recent audit that made my father beam. I folded my napkin into a square and thought, this is how legacy reproduces, through rituals that train love to survive pressure. Then the shadow fell. My father got sick. The morning the board voted, the river looked like sheet metal, and the sky wouldn't settle on a color. I wore the gray suit my father called my contract armor, the one that makes even compliments sound documented. Patricia Trish O'Neill, our board chair, opened with a roll call as if she were calling weather stations before a storm. We didn't do theatrics. We did procedure like prayer. When the motion to appoint me CEO carried, there was no applause. Only pens clicking closed, devices set face down, faces lifted toward me as if I de-stepped onto a narrow bridge they intended to cross behind me. I didn't cry. I wanted to. I wanted my mother S. lilies in the room and my father S. hand on my shoulder. Instead, I breathed like a diver and thanked them in the language we respect: commitments, timelines, metrics. I named our first 3 quarters of discipline: vendor audits, safety investment, and a culture reset that replaced heroics with competence. I said we'd publish supplier standards with real teeth. I said we'd measure executive bonuses against injury-free hours, not just margin. Someone smiled like I'd flattered a union. I didn't correct them. It wasn't flattery. It was a map. Afterward, my father shook my hand like I had negotiated with gravity and won a minor concession. His eyes were wet but defiant. He gave me a pen that had signed his first line of credit and said, "Ink remembers what mouths forget." Logan stood just behind him, a careful half-step back, the place a good lieutenant lives. The board confirmed Logan into a senior operations role on the COO track, a clear runway with honest markers. He accepted with that composed warmth that charmed welders and directors alike, then leaned and whispered, "I've got your 6." I believed him because, at the time, believing him was oxygen. The first week smelled like fresh paint and old coffee. The office version of new history laid over old. Sabrina rebuilt my calendar from warfare to choreography, protecting deep work blocks like she would a person on crutches crossing a busy street. She handed me briefing binders with the tabs aligned to my brain S-filing system, and corrected herself when she used my first name on an email to a supplier. "Ms. Dalton," she said afterward, wincing at her own familiarity. I told her the rule. Inside the house, Avery is fine. Outside, use Dalton like a door that locks. She nodded and locked it. Being CEO didn't feel like a promotion. It felt like custody. I supervised the company like a guardian appointed by a court. Eyes open, sleep rationed, attention taxed by the hour. Press interviews demanded sound bites that didn't betray nuance. Town halls demanded the opposite, nuance that didn't sound like evasion. I walked plant floors with steel-toe covers that pinched and took questions I wished were easier. A welder asked if profits meant faster hands or better gloves. Better gloves, I said, and authorized the order that afternoon. Our CFO joked that I was building socialism. I joked back that I was building endurance. Logan became the kind of operations leader people texted at midnight, not because they wanted attention, but because they trusted he would triage calmly. He shadowed shipping on bad weather days, rode with drivers on routes the algorithm misread, and ate at the cafeteria tables nobody else sat at. He had a talent for seeing around corners, and the corners liked being seen. At home, he debriefed like a medic. Facts first, feelings in the margins, then a plan. You carry the air cover, he'd tell me, tapping my shoulder. I'll carry the floor. It sounded like a hymn written for two voices. I set the tone with early wins that wouldn't headline. We renegotiated a freight contract without treating the carrier like a villain, and they surprised us with free surge capacity during a snow week. We replaced a brittle vendor management system with elastic rules that felt like someone had finally read the fine print with compassion. I gave the compliance team a raise and a bullhorn inside executive meetings. I told middle managers they could miss one forecast and keep their dignity if they never lied about a second. Trish sent a 2-word email that I archived in a folder labeled Fuel. Keep going. My father began stepping back with the delicate stubbornness of a man teaching himself to be less necessary. He took long afternoons and short calls. He listened to meetings without talking, then ambushed me with questions that pierced through the jazz of consensus to the drumbeat of risk. He told me he was proud with small, efficient phrases. Good catch, when I caught a hidden escalation clause. Right, when I cut a vanity project. Better, when I revised a policy to read like a promise rather than a threat. We ate soup in his office on Wednesdays and pretended the ritual was indestructible. Sabrina became indispensable in ways that didn't announce themselves. She learned the rhythm of my attention and placed hard things where my brain could meet them without flinching. She brought me water when I forgot to be a mammal. She slipped a handwritten note into a binder. Remember to ask procurement about the small supplier in Joliet. Her husband just had surgery. The note wasn't gossip. It was the kind of information that turns a transaction into continuity. I told HR to move her to banding that matched her weight. She refused to fuss and asked for a course in advanced analytics instead. I approved both. At night, Logan and I stood at the window that framed the river like a long, dark spreadsheet. We reviewed the day's choices with a gentleness that felt like luxury. He never competed for my decisions. He fortified them. He played defense when the agenda grew predatory. When a vendor tried to sell us speed with hidden teeth, he laid out a counteroffer that preserved the marrow of the deal without the poison. I've got your back, he said so often it became a background hum, a mechanical assurance like climate control. I would have sworn under oath that he meant it. Then my father coughed through a staff meeting and excused himself with a joke I'd never heard from him before. He canceled a site visit, which he had never done. I noticed snacks left untouched on his desk, a water bottle refilled but barely sipped, the way he rubbed his sternum like a man trying to erase a word written inside his chest. He called me late one night, voice rough with humility, and said, "I'm checking something out. Nothing major." He said nothing major the way you say steady hands while the ground tilts. We moved his appointments without labeling the reason, because language can be an accelerant. Doctors appeared like translators none of us had requested, speaking a dialect of numbers and cautions. Tests multiplied politely. We told the board he was on a scaled schedule. Trish's forehead line deepened, but her voice stayed smooth. I took to carrying 2 phones, one for the company, and one that held the emergency numbers I refused to call by accident. Logan overfunctioned with grace. He intercepted questions meant for me when I needed to answer the hospitals. He sat with my father between scans and talked quietly about poor rates and pump failures, the kind of conversation that keeps a proud man from noticing he is afraid. I learned to hold good news and dread in the same hand without dropping either. We landed a contract that would tie up 3 factories for a year. I smiled for the camera and felt my stomach gnaw itself. I signed off on a capital expenditure and then studied my father IS lab results in a parking garage, the pages yellow under sodium lights. Sabrina curated my day like triage, stacking meetings so I could disappear for 40-minute hospital windows and reappear with my lipstick repaired. She packed my bag with charger, almonds, tissues, a pen that wouldn't leak on consent forms. The board asked if we needed an interim plan for optics, which is how boards say, in case the universe is cruel. I drafted one that respected my father's privacy and the company's right to continuity. Logan's role expanded naturally along the lines we already drawn, senior operations with authority to act in routine crises. I kept strategic decisions in the public face. He kept telling me he had my back, and for a while, I rested there like a person who trusts a railing. We used shared calendars like joint custody of a life that refused to simplify. One evening, my father stood in our kitchen with his tie loosened and looked smaller than the man who once seemed industrial-sized. He took my hand in the precise grip he used for difficult contracts, not tender, not rough, intentional. "If it gets worse," he said, "you stay the course. Don't spare feelings that will only cost lives later." I promised and wanted to scream. He smiled tiredly. "You were built for this," he said. "I'm sorry the world is asking you to prove it." Logan washed the cups and stacked them like a man tidying a stage between acts. We were all pretending the next act had already been rehearsed. I slept in fragments and woke prepared. I wrote calm emails with hot veins. I held meetings like life rafts, and then drove to radiology and held my father's coat like it weighed more than a man's memory should. People said I was strong, which is what you tell a person carrying the furniture while the house burns. Logan started taking calls in the hallway, so I could sit with my father without hearing the company breathing. He pressed his palm to the small of my back when I forgot I had a body. And then the floor dropped. My father's health crashed, fast. No one could explain why. Grief didn't arrive like thunder. It seeped under doors, fogging everything. Dad's decline accelerated without a clean villain, only numbers that trended wrong regardless of our prayers. Days corroded into corridors, oncology, cardiac, pharmacy, billing. I learned the chair shapes in every waiting room. I memorized the clock above the radiology desk and the nurse who tightened blankets like origami. At Dalton, I pretended continuity. Sabrina guarded my calendar, padded transit time, printed executive summaries with margins wide enough to breathe. Logan ran operations with quiet adrenaline, updating me by text so my father wouldn't watch me work while dying. We counted victories in teaspoons. A stable lab result bought us a hopeful afternoon. A painless night felt like a lottery nobody could rig. Dad apologized for scaring me, which made me angrier than the illness. He asked about vendor audits between breaths. I pretended to need his advice so dignity wouldn't feel like charity. Logan brought coffee and jokes calibrated to hospital decibels. He walked my father through baseball scores and gasket tolerances. Sabrina assembled a binder labeled health that tracked appointments, side effects, insurance authorizations. She highlighted anything requiring my signature and placed a mint beside every pen. The prognosis slid from probable to precarious. I made peace with hope as a renewable but unreliable resource. Trish kept the board steady. She routed outside inquiries through communications, shielding my hours. Nights, I lay beside Logan listening to the apartment's old pipes breathe like tired animals. He rubbed circles between my shoulders and said nothing. which was better than speeches. Sabrina texted reminders phrased as kindnesses: eat, water, 10 minutes of air on the roof. I replied with emojis because full sentences sometimes shattered. Dad insisted on recording voice memos of process tips I already knew, just in case. I took him to the office on a quiet Sunday so he could say hello to the scaffolding he'd built. He touched the conference table like a museum visitor, then sat in my chair and called it too tall. We walked the plant floor without cameras. Workers pretended not to notice us, which is the finest respect. Logan hung back, letting my father narrate. He named bolts, belts, people. He quoted safety metrics like grandchildren's birthdays. In the parking lot, wind lifted his coat. For a second, he looked young again, then old. That night, he slept without stirring once. Morning rounds grew harsher. A new specialist spoke cautiously about interactions. I began reading every label like scripture. One afternoon, I caught a tech about to administer a dosage that didn't match the chart. She thanked me, corrected, apologized. Mistakes happen under fluorescent eternity. I told myself vigilance was love wearing a headset. Sabrina coordinated meal trains I never ate and car services I kept declining. Logan said I was punishing help for showing up late. He was right. I still declined. The night nurse with the dragonfly pin started saving the warm blanket for my father before I asked. When the call came, I was reviewing a vendor's force majeure clause. The hospital's number bloomed on my screen like an alarm disguised as punctuation. They said, "Come." They always said, "Come." We drove through a wet, reflective city where traffic lights looked like bleeding ornaments. Logan kept both hands on the wheel and every question in his mouth. At the door, Trish appeared like a lighthouse with paperwork. Time blurred into polite offers we refused, and forms I signed with a hand that didn't believe me. Machines quieted. My father's face emptied of effort. I became the floor completely. The funeral was efficient because I couldn't endure chaos. We chose Lily's because he would have chosen restraint. I delivered a eulogy like a quarterly report, then excused myself to cry in the catering office near the mop sink. People said what people say. The city kept being a city. I returned to Dalton like a widow returning to a ship during weather. Work hummed with need. Need saved me from memory. Sabrina screened condolences and condensed them into a single page. A small mercy. Logan watched me walk through days like a metronome set slightly too fast for comfort. I started sleeping at the office twice a week. It wasn't necessary. It felt necessary. My team learned to slide reports under my door like offerings. Logan argued gently and lost. He took the night shift anyway, troubleshooting supplier snarls from the couch near reception. Sabrina matched my stamina with surgical kindness. Coffee timed, protein bars placed, a blanket appearing at 3 a.m., like a permission slip. We triaged vendor renegotiations that smelled off, trimmed discretionary spend, and parked a risky expansion until we could breathe. I didn't see that grief makes you a magnet for equal parts angels and opportunists. Sabrina became my oxygen. She knew every file's hiding place, every stakeholder's patience threshold. She scheduled my sorrow like a meeting I could keep. 10 minutes in the stairwell, 5 in the restroom, 2 in the elevator when nobody else rode. She texted Logan on my behalf about board decks, vendor escalations, minor approvals. I didn't mind. Delegation is survival. He replied promptly, sometimes with a joke, sometimes with attachments. I watched them coordinate like competent colleagues and felt grateful rather than threatened. That's how betrayal travels, through corridors labeled efficiency, carrying coffee and good grammar, smiling like help, until later. We buried my father on a Wednesday. By Friday, I was at a supplier summit, shaking hands that squeezed too long. My inbox fattened with condolences and opportunities. An investment group offered bridge financing we didn't need. A familiar vendor proposed temporary price relief that translated into permanent leverage. Logan blocked the worst advances and celebrated small wins to keep my blood sugar up. Sabrina sat outside meetings, shaping the narrative. She said I was strong without sounding like a poster. She reminded me to eat. I believed goodness was winning because the fires we fought kept going out daily. On a rainy Monday, our pharmacist called to clarify refills. I almost ignored it. Sabrina transferred the call into my ear like a parent placing a spoon. The pharmacist wanted confirmation about a prescription under my father's profile, extended by a few days at someone's request. I frowned and checked the discharge paperwork. The medication list didn't match. Maybe a clerical lag, I told myself. I asked for dates, dosage, pickup location. The answers didn't smell right. I requested a printout. The pharmacist hesitated, then agreed. When I hung up, the air in my office felt electrically misfiled and cold. I walked to Sabrina's desk with the neutral face leaders wear when floors buckle. She looked up, alert, halfway to helpful. "Can you reconcile Dad's final med list with pharmacy records?" I asked. She said, of course, and reached for a notepad I recognized. Logan S. handwriting ghosted on the previous page, a list of board edits. My stomach's hinge squeaked. I returned to my office and waited without knowing what for. When the email arrived, the attachment was small and devastating. A ledger of dates and dosages. A pharmacy record showed a second prescription in my father's name, one he never used. After the funeral, the company behaved like a patient with a hidden fever. Numbers looked normal until you touched them. Then the heat surprised you. Our margin thinned a fraction, the kind accountants excuse as seasonal drift. A vendor added a surcharge the size of a paperclip and promised it would sunset next quarter. A trucking lane missed 2 pickups in 10 days, both blamed on weather nobody else reported. I told myself grief distorts perspective. I told myself to wait for better data. Waiting is how quiet damage learns to pack a bag and move in, without permission first. Logan framed the noise as turbulence. Operations, he said, is a parade of small fires, and the trick is not to evacuate the city every time a smoke alarm coughs. He proposed a soft freeze on discretionary maintenance and a friendly renegotiation with 2 long-term suppliers. He promised to carry the ugly and let me focus on strategy, board relations, and the ongoing integration of our safety bonus metrics. I wanted to believe him because competence had been our marriage's grammar. He spoke in plans. Plans had saved me. I nodded, drew guardrails, and agreed to temporary latitude for operations. Sabrina became an air traffic controller with impeccable nails. She built dashboards that reconciled procurement, freight, and cash timing, color-coding anomalies without melodrama. She booked standing check-ins with logistics, then slipped summaries onto my desk that read like calm weather reports with 2 unpronounceable clouds. She also became friendlier with Logan, forwarding late emails to his private account when they concerned plant outages. I noticed and did not mind. He was operations, and speed matters when forklifts stop. Their messages occasionally skipped me with apologies and screenshots. "Just clearing brush," she'd say, smiling. I let efficiency overrule my superstition. The margins kept whispering. Steel prices dipped, yet our cost of goods stayed stubborn, like a thermostat that refuses persuasion. Freight rates normalized, yet our invoices kept wearing tiny ankle weights. A small vendor in Joliet emailed to ask why payment terms had shifted from net 30 to net 45. Our system showed a new master agreement I didn't remember approving. Logan called it an automatic harmonization across tiers after the storm quarter, a temporary salve. He sounded reasonable. Reasonable is anesthesia for leaders who haven't slept. I authorized a review and moved to a meeting about scholarships for families. Then came the vendor who never complains. A packaging supplier phoned me directly, voice careful, to ask whether the new entity remitting payments, Westport Partners, LLC, was affiliated with Dalton. I blinked so hard the room pixelated. Our payables are centralized. We do not outsource remittance. I asked for the remittance advice. She forwarded a PDF with our logo reproduced perfectly, and banking instructions pointing to a regional institution I didn't recognize. Accounting traced 2 payments already cleared. "Glitch," Logan said, jaw tight, and ordered a freeze while IT investigated spoofing. Sabrina escalated fraud procedures with practiced calm that felt rehearsed somehow. The freeze reassured me for 48 hours, until procurement flagged a second anomaly. A favored hauler split its invoices across two entities with nearly identical names. The twin invoices were small, designed to slip under thresholds no one questions. I asked for a vendor master dump and a history of recent bank detail changes. The report landed like a quiet indictment. 8 suppliers with amendments in the last 60 days, all routed through help desk tickets approved with my digital signature. I stared at the audit trail. The signature hashed correctly. The timestamps matched meetings I could prove I'd attended elsewhere. I paged Sabrina. She arrived with a legal pad and that disciplined concern that never tips into drama. We walked the chain together, step by step, until the path reached a generic authorization template Sabrina's team used for routine banking changes. It carried my e-sign, inserted by an automation rule triggered when certain fields matched approved patterns. The rule had been expanded 6 weeks earlier. The change request listed Logan as sponsor. Sabrina reread the entry twice and said softly that it made operational sense during storm recovery. Operational sense is how empires launder mistakes. I thanked her anyway then. I confronted Logan that night with spreadsheets instead of accusations. He paced, read, cursed the automation rule, and called IT on speaker with the patient fury of a man whose houseplant was blamed for arson. He promised to unwind the changes by morning and personally contact every supplier touched by the rule. He cupped my face and apologized for not foreseeing the loophole. He said grief had overloaded my approvals, and he should have added second signatures across finance. The logic soothed me like warm water on a bruise. We slept badly and woke polite, our marriage a whiteboard again. In the morning, the fires appeared doused. It disabled the rule, restored prior bank details, and flagged the Westport remittance as suspected spoofing. Accounting issued stop payments and reissued clean wires. Procurement sent soothing notes to vendors explaining an internal filter update. For a week, the dashboards flattened like a calm sea that resents your questions. I briefed Trish with cautious optimism and scheduled an internal audit sweep to confirm nothing else had migrated. Logan suggested we postpone heavy scrutiny until quarter close to avoid spooking partners. I demurred politely. He conceded, smiling, and booked a plant tour instead for visibility. The tour was theater in steel-toe boots. Logan worked the floor like Rainworks dust, settling tempers with specifics. He praised a loader by name for shaving 20 seconds off a lane, then winked at a supervisor whose buffer redesign saved 3 pallets a week. Cameras captured competence, newsletters drafted themselves. Yet on the drive back, an operations analyst pinged me privately with a canceled calendar invite. A weekly reconciliation meeting between finance and ops had vanished 3 weeks ago. Per leadership, with no replacement touchpoint. Leadership meant Logan or me. I had canceled nothing. Silence evolved into calculus fast. I walked to accounting without entourage and asked for variance narratives in raw form, not polished slides. A junior staffer, cheeks pink with courage, showed me accruals that rolled forward like tumbleweeds, small, defensible, cumulative. Another produced a list of purchase orders closed at 98% receipt, with the final 2% hanging, conveniently delaying recognition. When I asked who authorized the pattern, they pointed upward in the abstract way employees do when the air itself is the boss. I thanked them, sent them home early, and stared at the ceiling vent until its hum sounded like a warning to move. I asked Sabrina to restore the reconciliation meeting and pull every approval tree touched since the rule change. She clicked, calm as snowfall, and promised drafts by morning. I wrote Trish a brief that said we were fine and meant we might not be. On my drive home, the river looked like dirty chrome. I parked, went upstairs, opened my laptop because rest felt disloyal. The inbox refreshed and stacked itself into towers. In the middle sat a line from audit, flagged priority, sent at 11:41 p.m., subject as a slap. Our internal auditor emailed me, "Who is Westport Ventures?" Morning light angled across my desk like a ruler, and the stack Logan carried gleamed with that careful menace only paper can hold. He set it down as if it were weather, unavoidable, impersonal. "Routine authorizations," he said, tone easy, eyes doing their familiar soft focus that always meant he'd already solved something. Sabrina hovered with a notary stamp, and a pen my father would have approved of. Black ink, bold line, no smudge. Tabs shouted where to sign, yellow flags like small shouting mouths. I felt the ache behind my ribs that grief left and mistook it for caution. The pages smelled like toner and lemon cleaner. He turned the first sheet toward me and leaned back, generous, patient, and waiting. "Authorizations for what?" I asked, because my father trained me to ask even when the answer felt obvious. "Quarter-end housekeeping," Logan said. "Vendor renewals, indemnities, a couple of banking attestations. Nothing controversial." He kept the top page angled so I could read without shadow. Sabrina slid me a one-page summary, bullet points neat as stitches. The bullets matched the tabs. The tabs matched what my week already required. She had pre-filled dates, our entity names, and my title with its exact comma. The confidence of it eased my lungs. I initialed where the summary told me to initial. "I'll scan after," Sabrina said, tapping the stamp. Notarized, filed, done. Her certainty felt like scaffolding beneath a bridge I trusted implicitly. The stack thinned, then thickened again with longer, denser text, clauses that read like twins in a mirror. I slowed, tracing nouns with a fingernail. Logan didn't rush me. "It's the annual delegation refresh," he said. "Standard after leadership transitions. Keeps day-to-day from bottlenecking at your door." I remembered my father's rule and tried to survive the language in my head. Temporary agency to execute routine processes, no transfer of ultimate authority, immediate revocation upon written notice. That all sounded right. A paragraph referenced compassionate leave. I inhaled sharp, then skimmed the carve-outs. If I took leave, the COO could act as interim on operational necessities. Reasonable, I thought. Human. Grief made foresight sting. Mercy felt like prudent insurance for storms. Sabrina kept the tempo. "Next tab," she murmured, sliding a sticky note with my initials already printed. She notarized signatures in a rhythm, press, seal, lift, that sounded like confidence. The last third contained proxies, a familiar template with updated exhibit letters. I read the headers, the defined terms, the cross-references. Somewhere, an email pinged. She silenced it. Logan watched my eyes, not my hand. "You're good," he said softly, and meant capable, not compliant. I initialed the proxy packet, comforted by the phrase revocable at will. Sabrina added witness lines and dated them. She stamped the packet's back page and aligned the corners like a book she treasured. Outside, the river flashed dull chrome. Inside, our pens kept marching in cadence. "Before we file," Logan said, "there's one more operational package. Legal asked for your sign-off, because timing's tight." He slid a slimmer set. Vendor notices, insurance certificates, a banking resolution moving a low-balance account to a new treasury bundle. The resolution mirrored older ones, with a clause delegating signature authority to the COO for checks under a threshold. Sensible. The notation about interim continuity matched the compassionate leave language. My father's pen waited by my elbow like a blessing. I traced the bank's routing number, cross-checked the account-ending digits with our treasury sheet. They matched. My initials moved almost by themselves, a muscle trained on trust and repetition. Sabrina notarized the page, ink crisp. Logan exhaled as tension evaporated for now. Afterward, the room felt lighter, as if we'd aligned pipes that had been rattling behind the walls. Sabrina collected the packets, squared them against the desk edge, and slipped them into a folder with a label already printed. Q4 delegations. Executed. She offered to courier originals to legal. I told her to scan and archive first. Logan kissed my temple in that public-private way that reads as teamwork. "You just saved us 3 weeks of drag," he said. He left for a plant call. Sabrina lingered to confirm my next block, then asked if I wanted tea. I said yes. My hands shook only after she closed the door. Relief is a narcotic grief gladly mistakes for earned rest between battles. The day trudged forward obediently. I kept meetings, signed invoices, approved a safety award that made a welder cry on video. At 5, the building shifted into that humming quiet when keyboards slow and vacuums wake. I stayed late to draft a board memo, then decided to leave the paragraph about interim continuity for morning. My brain felt overbright, like a room with too many lamps on. I walked the hallway toward the elevator, heels tapping a metronome I usually find reassuring. The conference room lights were on. The glass threw back the river's last light. I glanced in, expecting spreadsheets, coffee rings, ghosts. Instead, I saw posture, hands, mouths, a tableau arranged with careless, absolute possession of what was. Logan stood between the table and the window, jacket off, sleeves pushed high in a way I recognized from nights he fixed the washing machine. Sabrina leaned against the credenza, laughing that private laugh she saved for relief. He stepped close, and there was nothing ambiguous left to interpret. The kind of kiss that shuts doors. His hand cupped her jaw with the tenderness he used on me when we signed our mortgage. Her fingers climbed his shirt with muscle memory. I froze so completely my reflection looked like a mannequin. Perfect. Useless. A tide of heat swelled through me and then drained out my shoes. Somewhere an HVAC vent ticked. The city outside pretended to keep faith with office hours. I didn't go in. I didn't pound the glass or shatter decorum with sound. I remembered my father teaching me to collect facts before detonations. I stepped back until the column hid me, and watched long enough to know this wasn't a clumsy boundary lapse or a grief-shaped confusion. It was choreography practiced elsewhere, resumed here. Sabrina smoothed her blouse. Logan straightened, lip bruised, expression untroubled. He said something I couldn't hear and brushed her shoulder with proprietary gentleness. She grinned like a girl who had just solved a test ahead of time. They didn't see me. They didn't imagine I could be anywhere but home. The proxies in my bag fluttered like trapped birds demanding to be named tonight. I walked to the elevator on feet that felt borrowed and pressed the button like a witness swearing alone. Inside the cab, I faced the mirrored doors and tried to place the moment on a timeline. The pharmacy anomaly, the vendor reroutes, the automation rule expansion, the proxies revocable at will that suddenly felt like a locked gate whose key was not mine. My phone buzzed. Sabrina. File sent to legal. Sleep. Logan. Proud of you today. My stomach obeyed gravity. The doors opened on the lobby's stone hush, and the city's breath met mine with metallic indifference. I lifted my eyes, braced for impact again. That night, through the glass, I saw Logan and Sabrina kissing in the conference room. Morning scraped across the city like a zipper, and I arrived early, armed with the quiet plan only shock can write. Confront Logan in private, remove Sabrina from approvals, lock treasury, then breathe. He was already in my office, jacket on, compassion loaded in his eyes like blanks. We should talk, he said, closing the door gently, managerial etiquette for a preloaded verdict. I said we would, in the presence of Trish and legal. He smiled, regretful, and set a thin folder on my desk. Inside, incident memos, punctual and curated. My overnight emails, time-stamped at 2 and 3 a.m. A photo of me asleep on the office couch. A calendar cluster titled Hospital in screaming caps. You're not okay, he said softly. Let me shield you today. I'll be fine, I answered. Because fine is the word women say when they re-bleeding and the room prefers not to notice. He tilted his head, rehearsed concern pressurized behind his eyes. Avery. he said, voice shaped like a therapist's hallway. Grief changes judgment. I've drafted a note to staff. 1 week compassionate leave, backstop on operations, board looped in. It protects your title and your dignity. He used my father's language. Protect. Continuity. Dignity. I felt the shape of the trap before I saw the bait. Sabrina entered with a notepad and a glass of water, placed exactly where my hand would reach if I were the version of myself they had scripted. Dizzy, tired, grateful. Trish will meet us in the boardroom at 9, I said. Sabrina nodded, already texting, and the movement punched a memory. Her thumb flying across a screen labeled Logan, board, urgent. I stepped past both of them and into the hall, where the river flashed in winter light, and the office felt like a hotel that had borrowed our furniture. At the boardroom door, 2 security officers stood not blocking, exactly, but present like parentheses around a sentence no one wanted to read out loud. Why are they here? I asked. Routine, Sabrina said brightly. We've had protesters downtown this week. Trish arrived with legal, face composed, eyes doing calculus. She looked from me to Logan the way a foreman inspects scaffolding after a tremor. We're here to ensure continuity, she said. I sat, spine lengthened by a promise I'd made to a man who taught me to hold line. Logan opened a laptop and projected a slide titled Interim Coverage and Well-Being. HR language marched beneath it, tender and predatory at once. He spoke in the soft register of a man begging a beloved colleague not to drive after a drink. 1 week, he repeated. You've earned rest. We'll run the dailies. You retain full authority on strategic decisions. Only routine signatures delegated. Then why do we need security? I asked. Silence puckered. Legal murmured about precedent and safety. Trish's gaze tightened, sympathetic, but not permissive. I looked at the proxy packet Sabrina had notarized yesterday, felt its weight in my bag like a brick, and realized the clause about compassionate leave wasn't insurance. It was a pre-written stage direction. I stood. No leave, I said. We'll restructure approvals, but I'm here. Logan's shoulders flickered, just a fraction, and the flicker told me the next slide already existed. He clicked. A new headline, CEO Health Protocol, bullet points, late-night emails, observed distress, photographs of me at the hospital elevator, face unarmored. Who took those? I asked. Sabrina's pen didn't move. Legal said phrases about duty of care. Logan said, Avery, you're exhausted, please. He pushed a paper across the table, my own signature on a delegation I had survived only in theory. Temporary, he said. You can revoke at will. I reached for the paper, and his hand covered mine with theatrical tenderness. Let me carry the floor, he whispered, eyes wet. I looked at Trish. She searched my face for the most expensive truth. I told it. My husband is having an affair with my assistant, I said. The air went white. Sabrina dropped her pen. Logan didn't flinch. He exhaled like a man bracing for a friend's collapse. She's not well, he said to the room, not to me. Witness the paranoia. We've all worried. The word we've carried the weight of a jury already polled. Careful, Trish said. Not picking a side, picking liability. Sabrina's mouth worked around protest and chose silence. The security officers shifted their weight. A soft choreography I knew from every high-stakes termination I had ever ordered. I turned to Trish again. Call an executive session, I said. No staff, no spouses, no optics. Bring audit. She didn't move. We'll convene later today, she said. For now, optics matter. Then it happened in the plainest way ugliness ever does. Logan stood, straightened his tie with the humility of a man accepting an unwelcome task, and announced that, under the proxies I had signed, he would serve as interim CEO while I took compassionate leave. He didn't gloat. He didn't need to. He spoke with procedural sorrow, a tone that makes bystanders forgive cruelty because it arrives wrapped in etiquette. Sabrina rose and stepped behind the chair at the head of the table. My chair, fingers grazing the leather the way a person checks whether a stove is hot. "We'll keep everything steady," she murmured. My body did not fail me. Shock can be a bridge if you plant your feet. "I am not taking leave," I said to the room, to the ceiling, to my father's rule taped inside my skull. "And I am not authorizing any change of control." Logan nodded, as if I'd asked for almond milk. "Understood," he said. "You don't have to authorize it. You've already delegated for emergencies. We'll keep your office untouched. Your email remains yours. This is a kindness." He emphasized the last word, and I felt the boardroom tilt toward that slippery mercy men call professionalism when they want to unmake a woman without fingerprints. HR arrived, carrying 2 folders and the soft voices reserved for messy Tuesdays. "We've prepared language for staff," the director said. "Avery is stepping back briefly to focus on family. We honor her leadership and privacy." I thought of my mother, S. Lilies, and my father, S. Penn, and the way insurance forms multiply in the dark. I thought of every woman who has been escorted out of a room she built. "If you send that email," I said, "I will reply all." HR winced. Logan offered me a look of pity so polished it reflected me back distorted. "Please don't," he whispered. The whisper calibrated exactly for witnesses. "This isn't you." Security moved closer by very little, enough to communicate the end of debate. Trish rubbed her temples once, then set her hands flat like a judge delivering terms. "We will convene at 3, she said. "No decisions are final until then." But the room believed a decision had already been packaged. Executive assistants materialized, passing out copies of the script. I caught Sabrina watching me with an expression I had once mistaken for admiration. Now I recognized it as ambition disguised as gratitude. She lifted her chin toward the hallway. I understood the gesture. "Your stage exit is that way." I picked up my bag. I could have fought, shouted, bled publicly. But my father had trained me for a different weapon. Time. 3 o'clock, I said. "Audit, counsel, full packet." Logan nodded, benign as weather. "Of course." He touched Sabrina's shoulder like a pastor offering comfort. I walked out, spine unbroken because I chose it. Outside the boardroom, the glass walls mirrored an office reorganizing itself around a narrative. Generous interim, grieving executive, continuity preserved. PR drafted sentences. HR arranged a town hall. IT waited for instructions it prayed not to receive. I passed my name on the wall and did not look away. At reception, the security officers caught up politely. "Ms. Dalton," one said, voice low, professional. "We've been instructed to escort you to the lobby for today." I laughed, a short, clean sound that surprised us all. "Of course," I said. "Let me set an example of compliance." We walked together through the spine of Dalton Holdings, past framed photos of ribbon cuttings and welders and scholarships. People pretended not to see, the truest kindness available to witnesses. The elevator opened. Inside the cab, I watched our reflections arrange themselves. 2 men doing their job, 1 woman doing hers, which today meant not feeding a story that would try to eat me. The doors opened onto the lobby's cool stone and winter light. HR had beaten us there with a box. My desk was not in that box, just the detritus considered safe for a grieving woman to hold. Water bottle, framed rule in my mother's handwriting, a dish of paper clips shaped like gold teardrops. The receptionist blinked hard. I thanked her by name. My phone buzzed with the staff email. Subject line, temporary leadership update. I silenced it. I turned toward the revolving doors, already thinking in packets, and proof, and the way signatures can be unspooled if you pull on the right thread with steady hands. "Wait," Trish said, materializing from a side corridor, heels precise, hair a dark helmet against the light. She moved like a person who had made a decision and decided to pay for it personally. She didn't hug me. She didn't rehearse pity. She pressed a sealed envelope into my palm, heavy for its size, the paper thick enough to be its own argument. My name was written in my father's hand, the ink slightly faded, the D in Dalton curved like a hook he'd used since college. "Your father left this for exactly today," she said, voice low, unblinking. "Read it before you do anything else." Outside the revolving doors, winter gnawed the river, and the envelope warmed in my hand like a rescued bird. I didn't wait for a safe room. I tore it open beside a ficus, ignoring security, pretending not to watch. Inside, my father's handwriting, a brass key, and a small black USB tagged "Read First." The note said, in his engineer's script, "Avery, if this day arrives, assume someone rehearsed it. Use the key, watch the video, then call Naomi." My throat tightened. The bottom of the envelope revealed a thinner sheet, notarized, titled, "Supplemental Will and Golden Share Instruction. For today." Trish drove me to the storage unit the key belonged to, a narrow garage near Kinsey where my father rented redundancy. The lock surrendered stubbornly. Inside, a fireproof box waited like a lesson. We set it on the hood and turned the tumbler. Paper lived there, ledgers, a sealed flash drive's duplicate, and the supplemental will dated 6 months earlier, witnessed by Naomi Green. The language was unmistakable. A golden share triggered if I were removed, coerced, or incapacitated by deceit. It granted board convening power, temporary veto over any delegation, and authority to petition a court for injunctive relief. I plugged the USB into my laptop in Trish's car while Snow considered us. The video opened on my father at his desk, tie loosened, eyes clear. "Avery," he said, steady. "If this plays, someone has tried to separate you from your office using your care as evidence. They will sound kind. They will be rehearsed. Here are names you can trust: Trish, Naomi. Detective Darren Holt, Chicago PD, Financial Crimes." He smiled a tired half-smile. "I love that you lead with mercy. Not today. Rule 1, kid. Never sign what you haven't survived. Now let's survive what you signed." I called Naomi before the laptop cooled. She answered on the first ring, voice like linen. "I was waiting," she said. We met at her office, lights low, conference table already staged with a scanner, a Redwell, and copies of bylaws annotated in pencil. Trish sat opposite me like guardrail and witness. Naomi read the supplemental will twice, then extracted the golden share certificate from the box and weighed it like a small gavel. "We will notice the board under the emergency clause," she said. "We will preserve evidence, forbid destruction, and prepare a TRO if they resist." At once. Before noon, Naomi had served notice. She looped in an e-discovery firm and sequestered my email, Sabrina's permissions, and Logan's approvals. "Chain of custody is everything," she said, sliding me a legal pad. "Write nothing you're not prepared to read in court." I nodded and called Detective Darren Holt, whose number my father had added to the note. He arrived in a gray suit that had known rain, eyes observant without theatrics. "Tell me about Westport Ventures," he said. I told him the remittances, the automation rule, the pharmacy anomaly, and the kiss I couldn't unknow. He didn't look surprised. Darren worked methodically. He requested subpoenas for bank records tied to Westport AS accounts and asked Naomi to preserve our vendor master change logs. Trish coordinated with audit to reconstruct approvals without tipping staff into panic. Sabrina texted me twice, "Are you okay?" And I didn't reply. Logan sent an email to all employees, borrowing my cadence like a stolen coat. Naomi intercepted a shredding request from operations. She froze it and called facilities to seal the bins. By 2:00, we had a meeting docket. 3, emergency board. 3:30, evidence presentation. 4, decision. Between slots, I breathed like I was salaried to. The Westport thread unraveled quickly when banks complied. The remittances had landed in a new account opened with documents bearing a digital authorization linked to Sabrina S. Notary ID. The account's beneficial owner was another LLC, folded inside a trust naming a nominee service in Nevada. Darren followed IP logs from our vendor portal to a coffee shop 2 blocks from Dalton and a home router registered to a short-term rental near Logan A.S. Gym. IT found that the automation rule expanding approvals had been proposed from Sabrina S. workstation and approved via Logan S. SSO token, while my calendar showed me at radiology. The pharmacy anomaly became a wire through the wall. Darren obtained dispensing logs showing a second prescription filled under my father's profile days before his collapse, ordered by an unfamiliar provider whose credentials were later flagged as stolen. Pickup footage captured a woman in a Dalton parka with her back to the camera. The timestamp matched Sabrina's lunch hour. The records also showed an attempted dosage correction called in from a prepaid phone the evening before the crisis. When Darren traced the number's tower pings, it hugged roots between our office and Logan's gym, then died behind the conference room's glass. At 3, the boardroom felt colder than steel. Naomi opened with the will, the golden share, and the video, which she played to the sentence where my father said, "Not today." Trish nodded once and took the gavel. "Under the golden share," she said, "we reconvene and review irregular delegations." Naomi laid out evidence like surgical instruments, Westport payments, banking changes, IP addresses, notary logs, pharmacy records. Darren presented the timeline without adjectives. When he finished, the room breathed for the first time. Trish turned to me. "Ms. Dalton?" I stood and exercised the share. The board voided the proxies. Logan tried to reframe, voice low, hands open. He called the Westport setup a misguided attempt at streamlining payments during the crisis, blamed a contractor, and denied knowledge of pharmacy irregularities. Sabrina said little, cheeks chalky, insisting she notarized what she was given. But the evidence stacked like bricks. Trish declared Logan suspended pending investigation, removed Sabrina's access, and appointed Naomi interim corporate secretary to oversee remediation. I moved swiftly. Treasury locks engaged, vendor masters restored, dual authorization reinstated, forensic images captured, staff notified with language that named wrongdoing without theater. To suppliers, we sent clean instructions and apologies with dates attached. Clawback took weeks and will cost years. Naomi filed civil claims to recover diverted funds and referred criminal matters to the state's attorney, who convened a grand jury. Darren's team issued warrants. Devices were imaged, statements taken. I instructed HR to preserve severance pending outcomes. Logan's attorney floated settlement fantasies. Sabrina's attorney tried remorse. I signed nothing but receipts. At home, I boxed wedding photos and returned a ring that suddenly weighed like machinery. I slept in my father's chair with the video paused on his smile. Noise calmed. The building held. My chest did not. Grief revised itself daily. Here is the price, without perfume. I won the business and lost the life. My father remains gone. My marriage was theater. The city lights glitter beyond my office again, but I don't linger to watch them throw coins on the water. Rule 1 survived me, though I broke it and bled. The board thanked courage, vendors thanked clarity, employees thanked stability. I thanked the door that locked behind the 2 who mistook kindness for vacancy. I walk the halls with gentler shoes and firmer hands. Justice is not joy. It's scaffolding. Sometimes that has to be enough for now. Comment if you've ever trusted the wrong person and what it cost you. Should Avery press full charges against Logan and Sabrina? Tell me below and subscribe for more emotional justice stories.